And the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Dear brothers and sisters, I congratulate you all for reaching the first Sunday of Great and Holy Lent. For those who, this is the first Lent in the Orthodox Church, I may have mentioned this in a previous sermon, every Sunday is given to a particular theme and event. It's exactly the same. The 6 Sundays of Lent cover the 6 themes, and that doesn't change. And the first Sunday of Great and Holy Lent is the victory of Orthodoxy. And what this is all about, and I have to be careful I don't go down a rabbit hole here, and that is, this was all about the iconoclasm. Now, we take it for granted when you walk into an Orthodox church, the first thing that hits you is all the icons. And that kind of is very visually quite stark. There was a period in the 8th century, going into the 9th century as well, where this issue of icons came up about whether or not it was right to have icons in the church, pointing to the second commandment given to Moses, which was, "Thou shalt make no graven images." And so this dispute arose and resulted in hundreds and thousands of icons that were destroyed, that we will never be able to recover. But the point, because I don't want to go too far with that, the point is that in the end, through the 7th Ecumenical Council, through people like St. John of Damascus, they held to the truth. Because see, it's not just about a picture, a painted picture. There's something far deeper theologically that's important. It's not as if the church was simply trying to protect nice artwork. The point is, the theological point is this: if you can't depict Christ in an icon, then you're denying his humanity. He took a form. When God gives a commandment to Moses in the Old Testament, God never takes a form. Although, I won't get into the whole God telling them to build the Ark of the Covenant with cherubs, and then telling Moses to create a serpent out of, I can't remember what it was, and to put it on a staff. Anyway, as I said, we could go on and on, but this is not the time. But the point is that in the end, the truth, which is and has been held by the Orthodox Church throughout the centuries, was victorious. But, and of course we have the restoration of the icons, but it came at a cost. And let me speak a bit more generally, not just about the 7th Ecumenical Council, but all the ecumenical councils. They all came at a cost. All of these efforts required a sacrifice. For St. John of Damascus, who wrote extensively on why it was absolutely necessary to have icons in the church, that resulted in both of his hands being cut off. Although the next morning they walk into the cell and his hands are restored. So that shows you the truth. But they held on to the truth, but it required sacrifice. And the same can be said of all of the ecumenical councils and all of the struggles throughout the church's history. And I wanted to touch on this point this morning because it's very important, and that is, being in the first week of Great and Holy Lent, this idea of sacrifice. Again, often in Great and Holy Lent, we think about the food. I'm going to have to give up meat, I'm going to have to give up ice cream. But it can't stop there. It can't just be about, I have to put aside these certain foods. if we really desire to achieve something through the period of Great Holy Lent, we have to be able to sacrifice. And unfortunately, and I know this is not going to please everybody, that means being uncomfortable. And we live in a society where you have to be as comfortable as possible at all times. But if we were paying attention to the epistle reading, listen to who it was listing. It was listing those who were in caves and in nakedness, who were hungry and who were persecuted and all of these sorts of things. They all sacrificed. Listen to the gospel. The gospel is what? It's the same gospel every first Sunday of Lent as well. And that is the Lord calling Nathanael. Look at Andrew and Nathanael. They get called, they sacrifice everything in their lives to follow the Lord. And they don't turn back. And so this concept of sacrifice is essential in the spiritual life. Absolutely the contrary to the delusion that is the prosperity gospel, which is a fallacy. It's just ridiculous. Try convincing St. John the Baptist of that kind of a gospel. I don't think so. Someone who lived on locusts and honey in the wilderness. But really, you know that I happen to know firsthand many examples of people who through Great and Holy Lent, they needed something from the Lord. They needed something from God. And so they made sacrifices throughout Great Lent that went above and beyond. Even in this period of Great and Holy Lent, I know of people who, with the permission and their guidance of their father confessors, that they fast the whole day, abstain from food until sunset. They get up every night to do the midnight prayers. They do something, they're sacrificing something. And this is very important. How many of us rearranged our lives this week so that we could be at Great Compline, one of the services this week? I know we can all think of many excuses. Trust me, I understand this. Having a family of my own, I understand the complexities of life and everything else that goes on. But the question is, what am I prepared to sacrifice in the way that our fathers before us sacrificed in order to keep the faith and the truth? If someone like St. John was prepared to have his hands cut off, St. Maximus, who had his tongue cut out, St. John Chrysostom, who was exiled, I can't remember how many times, and as he's dying in exile, the words that come out of his mouth is, "Give glory to God for all things." What are we prepared, if we want to spiritually revive ourselves, or have a spiritual revival, I should say, throughout this period of Lent, we have to make sacrifices. Now, I'm not suggesting that people abstain from food all day and go to those lengths. Fasting and those sorts of things have to be done with guidance. It can be done in the wrong way, and it can then have a negative effect. So it has to be done with guidance. We have to be very careful. It can be very easy to come, especially if you're new to Orthodoxy, to become invigorated by all these practices. But if it's not done with wisdom, it can then have a negative effect. Even the monks in the monastery, if they want to add an extra day of fasting, have to get the permission of the abbot to do it. Why? Because it has to be done in a way that's appropriate to my spiritual level. And so this is why we get the guidance of our father confessors, and our spiritual guides, because they know they know where we're at in the spiritual journey, and they'll say, yes, this is acceptable, no. But I want to put a challenge out there to everyone, that we will make a commitment this Great and Holy Lent to reorganize our life to be at as many of the services as possible. We have the Liturgy of the Pre-Sanctified Gifts this Wednesday evening. So the liturgy is from 6 to 8 p.m. That means we have to, if for those who are preparing themselves for communion, we start fasting from, say, midday, so that we can partake of communion. Am I willing to make the sacrifice to prepare myself for communion, to do the fasting, to make sure that my Wednesday evening is empty, so that there's nothing else? It's the service. What am I prepared to sacrifice this Lent? Because we have to get away from constantly thinking about the food. The reason why the church has this fasting the way it is to make the food as simple as possible, so you don't have to spend much time thinking about it. I heard a story, my old father confessor. He was telling a story about they prayed. This was during Great Lent, and they prayed a liturgy in the morning, and they had communion, and they had a bishop who was visiting. And of course, the bishops are monastics, and because the communion is the liturgy is in the morning. Generally, the rule is that you don't abstain after that from food. That abstention doesn't apply. And he wasn't sure what to do. He's a monk. He said, I don't know whether he's going to abstain or what to do. Do I offer him breakfast? So he offered him breakfast. And he said, I put the food in front of him, and then I noticed he took a little bit of bread, and there was some salt. And during the whole breakfast, he just dipped the little bit of bread, this one piece of little bit of bread in the salt. He ate it, and he said, I didn't see him eat anything after that. So even though the rule says he doesn't have to abstain, he's continuing to sacrifice in a different way. And I want us to change this mindset. I would love to see everybody attending as many of the services as possible. Yes, that means maybe we have to change things in our daily lives. For those of us in families, it may mean, for example, that one parent has to stay home with kids to allow the other one, and vice versa. For example, we have 2 unction services being prayed during Great and Holy Lent. For those of you who have not been to an unction service, it's a service for the sick, but not just for the physically sick. It's also for the spiritually sick, and we're all spiritually sick. This is a wonderful service. So there's one at the cathedral, and there's going to be another one at Rocklea. And why do we have the 2, by the way? It's because we understand, the church understands that many of the mothers and fathers who have children, it's not easy for them to get to the same service. So we have 2 of them. So in my case, I will attend one service, and then my Matushka will go to another service, and I'll look after the kids. And that way we both get the benefit. But we cannot expect to achieve and grow through Lent without sacrifice. When God wanted to test Abraham and to help him to grow in faith, what did he do? He said to him, take your son, your only begotten son, Isaac, and sacrifice him. When God wanted to test Job, what did he do? He allowed the evil one to take away all of his goods. All of his children died in the one day. And then he developed a terrible disease all over his body. He had to sacrifice. He had to learn sacrifice. There's no achievement without sacrifice. You ask any athlete or any world-class musician, how they got to where they got. And I can guarantee you they're not going to tell you, I sat there, most of the time watching Netflix and occasionally playing my instrument. It's not realistic. So it's fundamentally important that we understand that sacrifice is the means to which we grow spiritually during this period. Not simply to feel kind of, I'm fasting. I'm not eating the foods that the church has told me not to eat. So I'm doing Lent. No. Let's think about how we can do it a bit more. Maybe it is adding some extra prayers. Maybe we do some extra psalms during our day. Interestingly enough, I was reading that Metropolitan Onufry in Ukraine has given a prayer rule to everybody in Ukraine during this Great Lent to pray Psalms 45 and 90 for peace and prosperity in Ukraine and for the ceasing of hostilities. Why don't we incorporate those two psalms in our day? You know how long the psalms take you to read? It takes nothing. I spend more time on YouTube than I probably would doing these psalms, if I'm realistic about how I spend my time. But that's another thing. Am I prepared to sacrifice social media? Things that are not edifying in order to be able to do what? To be able to read something spiritually edifying for the fast. So, brothers and sisters, let us think about and have this focus of sacrifice in our lives during this period of Great Holy Lent. Let's sacrifice our time, our resources, and ultimately our hearts so that we can come to the end and feel the depth of the resurrection. And I'll finish with this. And I am a broken record. We've already reached the first Sunday of Great and Holy Lent. There are only 6 Sundays. The Great and Holy Lent goes by very, very quickly. So let's get started from now. Let's not say, I'll wait. There's time. Before you know it, it'll be Palm Sunday. So let's use the time wisely so that we can feel the joy of the resurrection. Amen.